open it to questions. If anybody who's attending tonight has any questions, you can either raise your hand through your Zoom panel and I can unmute you so you can ask your question, or you can type it into the Q&A. So if any of those of you attending have any questions for us, feel free. All right, we've got a few hands up. I'm going to go first to Brad Smith. So Brad, you should be able to unmute yourself now and go ahead and ask your question.
Thank you, Kelly. I'm the first to ask a question. I was the last to arrive. My apologies. I missed the early part of the presentation, but I'm grateful you're going to hand it out. I am unclear on the process of making an appointment with each of the representatives that we volunteers have agreed to see. Can you help me with that, please? Sure.
We are working on setting those appointments kind of on your behalf, on behalf of all of us. It is a slow process so far. We know that these legislators are extremely busy, but we are still working to schedule those in the coming weeks. We know that all of you also have busy schedules. And unfortunately, trying to match up a small group of us, ultimately the legislator is going to tell us when they will see us. And then we'll have to go back to you all and hopefully we've got, the right people available. If not, we can look at rescheduling. But we had a lot of discussions about this amongst our little team and decided the best way, rather than try and, excuse me, find the times that our volunteers were available, let's start from the legislators' perspective, get their availability, and then go to the volunteers and say, this is the date and time they've given us. Can you make it? And see where we stand after that. Kingsley or CJ or Chet, feel free to jump in if you have anything to add to that.
No, at least on the Senate side, which I'm working primarily. I think
you may be muted, Kingsley. I'm not hearing you,
okay.
Unless it's a me problem.
No, I'm not here. Are you not hearing me? Can you hear me, CJ?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
So on the Senate side, which is the side I'm primarily working right now, by it's just circumstance, most of them are requiring a email request, and they're basically working it into their schedules as they can. They will be in Tallahassee 2 weeks in October, the second and third weeks, I believe, and then they'll be back. So it's possible this gets pushed back into later October. We just don't know. It's just going to be what they tell us when it happens. We may have a little negotiating room, and if we do, we certainly will get back to you and make sure that you guys participate in making that decision.
Is that good, Brad?
Yes, thank you very much.
You're welcome. Peter, let's go to you.
Thank you. And thank you for all your work. Yeah, thank you. And thank you for all your work in this. I'm new to this. However, it seems to me that it's the same scenario over and over again with our government officials, that we have a law already in place and it's just not being enacted. And I'm trying to think on a positive scale, how do we get these counties that are, right now I'm hearing that we have laws in place and they're just not implementing the policies that are in place. How do we get, and for instance, I'm in Palm Beach County. How do we get the authorities, and is it the game and fishery that should be enforcing the laws that are in place right now, i.e. the derelict boats, get these things out of here? Why, if there's so many tagged, what's holding up the implementation of it? And can boaters, such as ourselves that are out there, actively be engaged and say, we see this boat sitting there. I see them all the time. Everyone does. Who's out on the waterway, you see these boats sitting there for 90 days, 180 days, whatever, and they're just sitting there and they shouldn't be. So how do we get the local, I think it starts with the locality. How do we get them to start enforcing it, and why are they not enforcing it? Is it monetary? What is it? So if we can start at the local level and show progress for existing laws, instead of piling more laws on top of laws, which is the usual, politician way, which is just complete asinine. It even just stymies the ones that are in place now. So that's
Well,
my
first,
comment.
let me just explain. No legislature is beholden to what's been done by prior legislators or sessions. That's just the mantra. That's the way they present. That's the way they consider it. So you've got to walk that line very carefully when you talk about prior legislation and that it was done by whoever. Number two, it is a county decision as to whether to pursue anything limitation area. And in fact, Palm Beach is pursuing that, as I understand it. It's a process, and it in fact requires them to designate a specific area, then go to the Florida Wildlife Commission and have that area, that announcement publicized. There needs to be a hearing. It's an entire process so that there's public input. It takes time. It's not done overnight. And that's where most of these counties are right now. We just had announcements for Pinellas, and we had an announcement for Brevard. And we're expecting one any day from Escambia, which is Pensacola. So it's just the way the process is, that it takes time. Now, in terms of local reinforcement of derelict vessels, you're right. There needs to be some kind of enforcement, and it takes a long time to designate and remove a derelict vessel that belongs, and effectively saying, I'm taking your possession. And there has to be a process that does that and recognizes that you've effectively abandoned your possession, and it now a danger or impediment to navigation. So it's not something which is done lightly and for good reason. And it's, but in terms of your process, I actually don't know, aside from reporting your awareness of vessels. I don't know what you can do on that, and that's worth checking out. And I can get some information on that. CJ, do you have it, or does Kim?
I do. I actually, when I send the PowerPoint out to all of you, I did put notes in some of those slides. If you'll just look at, like when you look at a PowerPoint, it has like little notes. FWC has a reporting. I put links in there so you can go and report, and so that they can at least add it to their list. And they actually have a really neat map that shows where every derelict boat that's been reported, and they FWC has gone by and seen and verified, yes, that's, and then they check it and it's on that map. So it's a pretty cool. And then once it gets on the map and says, this is a problem, now they can start doing the paperwork and getting all these things done. Right now they have 647 that are designated, and 300, so 50% of them have already started the process with the paperwork. So it's happening. But you can go and report. So that those links are in the PowerPoint under the notes, especially on the FWC pages.
Yeah, the other thing you need to be, just for your own background, aware of is that it's expensive to take these boats out and destroy them. I'm not sure about the legislation for the appropriations for this year, but last year there was over $20 million appropriated for that purpose. And that money was given to the counties to actually implement this legislation. So, I mean, that's part of the context that I think they're being responsive to their constituents who are complaining. It's just not done quickly, unfortunately. It's a problem in the entire US, actually in the entire developed countries. It's just universal, but that's not a quickly solved one. CJ?
FWC also got some additional dollars when the infrastructure bill came through. For whatever reason, they got some extra dollars designated for that, for cleanup of derelict vessels as well. So there is dollars there. There is opportunities there. Again, I would tell you, Peter, that most of it is just getting it listed, getting the paperwork done, getting the okay, and then they pay somebody to come and clean it out. So it is a process of things, because they do have to do other, but there are dollars there. And I think that's kind of what we want legislators to understand, and that there's processes and there is actual dollars that have been designated to get that done. And then also the VTIP program was given $4 million, which is basically before it goes derelict. If you say, I can't handle this boat anymore, or say a boat was anchored out and somebody passed away, they left it there and somebody passed away, but they still have that boat, like it got passed to somebody in their family, they can just take the title and give it to FWC and say, I don't want this. It hasn't gone to derelict status yet, but I don't want this. And there are dollars for removal of those boats as well. And that's an education process too. So there are dollars for it. So we just have to get through the process. But again, I put links to all of those within the PowerPoint if you want to go and learn more about how to use those.
Does that answer your questions, Peter?
Yeah, it does. I see it as a twofold type thing, and I think it's very, very, the one that we're trying to do with the one that the group that we're talking with right now is we're trying to stop them from enacting any more legislation, saying that we have legislation, let's just enforce it. So I understand where this group is coming from, but I also try to look at that second part of the equation is the enforcement of the existing rules. So. And I think that really, I don't know how we get that out to boaters, because like you said, I think 90% of us want this cleaned up. We want clean water. We want these derelict boats out of here and designated areas. And, a length of time, 45 days is more than ample time. So, I see where my role would be if I meet with the legislator. And I thank you for saying about the previous legislation. Doesn't mean a damn thing to the guy that's, wants to put a new legislation. So this is my law, my rule. So I get that. It's just, it's tough.
One other thing I might mention is we're choosing legislators who have a key role to play in this legislation. So these aren't just all the legislators. These are specific legislators who have been pointed out to us, have a specific role in this process as it relates to this kind of legislation. So these guys are important to us. So your role with them is even more important in that sense.
Right. Okay.
Thanks, Peter.
Thank you. Thank you.
Let's go to John Knoll. He's had his hand up for a bit. John, go ahead. Do we still have you with us, John? Not hearing John.
Can you hear me?
There we go. Yep, there you are. Hi, John.
Okay. Sorry, I had technical difficulty figuring out how to unmute.
No worries.
So, as you said, they're basically trying to solve problems for their constituents, right? They're not just out there making legislature for the fun of it.
Right.
So I've heard basically two of the problems in what you covered. One is derelict boats. I think that's probably largely the biggest one. From the time a boat sinks to you can get it out is 12 to 18 months. That process you just described is not, I know it was, so you do step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4, but those are long processes each.
Yep. Yeah.
So, its constituents are always going to be unhappy that there's derelict boats out there. And there's not really ever going to be a situation where there aren't derelict boats out there because of how long it currently takes to get one removed, right? So if one sinks, it's there for a year as an eyesore. The other thing you mentioned was, and you kind of glossed over it, but it's, people with waterfront property not wanting people to anchor basically off their land. And I understand that they don't own the water, but they also don't want to look at ugly boats, right? If it's a beautiful boat out anchored off their property, they probably care less than if it's a derelict piece of junk. But So I guess I got two questions. One is, what are the other problems that constituents are bringing to their legislatures that are making them want to do legislation? And then the other is, aside from talking to the legislatures, what have you talked to, and what are you doing to talk to local, either law enforcement or the guys who are actually trying to remove the derelict vessels, or effectively the people who are behind the scenes trying to make these problems go away? Because, you know, my person in Tallahassee is not out there removing derelict vessels, right? They're sitting behind a desk getting phone calls from people who are irate. So are we also trying to interact with and support the people who are actually on the front line of trying to solve these problems?
Let me respond to the first part of the question, because it's the easiest part, frankly. Last year, there was a last-minute amendment introduced in the House that would have extended a no anchoring area just north of Government Cut, and it would have, in effect, made anyone coming in from Bimini, or which would be, they'd be coming in towards dusk normally, because they'd be leaving early in the morning in a sailboat anyway, or anyone leaving to go to Bimini, they would have to leave very early at night. It would make that trip much more difficult, because it would remove an area where they could just camp out for the night when they got in, or camp out for the night before they left, similar to what you might do at Peanut Island, if you're familiar with that. In any case, it was a last-minute amendment. The rationale they told us was, well, we've got some businesses that have established themselves on the water, and they're not appreciated by the homeowners, and they wanted to pass this basically blanket legislation amendment. You can question the credibility of that explanation. Because we pointed out there are other ways to solve this. If this is a business issue, there are ways of dealing with that. I also know for a fact that specific area is subject to having hundreds, with no exaggeration, of day boats coming in and clustering around a nearby island. There's nothing that this legislation could stop that. But nevertheless, it could be a clear irritant to anyone who's living in that area. So you may well find those kinds of complaints. They're not related specifically to cruises, camping, spending a night and moving on, or even a few nights and moving on. They may be totally unrelated. And that's one of the reasons why we want you to ask what kinds of concerns are being expressed by their constituents. So you can give us some early warning, if you will, as to what kinds of things they're experiencing. Now, I personally have not reached out to any of the local law enforcement officials. The kinds of things we've done as a coalition has been to actually try to stop local ordinances or local municipalities from establishing no anchoring areas illegally, not so much as trying to assist them. But Kim, you or CJ, you may know more than I do.
Yeah, no, just to kind of tag onto that idea of the law enforcement effort. Current state law precludes municipalities from regulating anchoring. They're not allowed to do it. Yet we've seen a rash of municipalities pass ordinances that do just that, and then send their law enforcement officers out there to try and enforce this ordinance that we know is in violation of state code. So that's kind of where we've been involved in, any of the local law enforcement issues. And it's not the fault of the Leos who are being sent out there to enforce an ordinance, because they don't know it's against state code to have such ordinance. We've been pretty successful in resolving that through the municipality's attorneys. And I believe it was an MTOA member, correct, CJ, that pro bono was an attorney and did some work on that in some of the in some of these municipalities. But again, the anchoring the anchoring limitation areas, it's kind of the catch-all for that. That particular piece of the code gives municipalities and counties the ability to regulate anchoring in that one way by establishing an ALA. And there's a bunch of regulations that go along with that. It's not just that they can say, here's an ALA, 45 days is your limit. It can only be a certain amount of their waterways. I think it's 10%. A single ALA can only be X number of acres, X size. So there's a lot of work to be done and to move towards that. And that's part of why our message is that this is a good solution. It solves the problems. It hasn't been given the time to prove its efficacy, because it's not as simple as snapping your fingers and suddenly we have a new ALA. There's a process that the Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission is responsible for walking them through and approving the ALA and getting the signage and all of those things. So, from a local law enforcement standpoint, doing this the right way should require very little of that. There's a host of, Florida. Florida is really, it's got the most boats, but it's also taken the lead on all of these issues. But it really has shifted. I think that we've been successful, and the industry as a whole has been successful in differentiating between the derelict vessels and anchoring. Because initially, 5-10 years ago, it was we just need to stop anchoring and this whole problem will go away. So I don't know if that really answers your question, but currently it's not so much of a law enforcement issue, in my view, except for when a municipality passes an ordinance that really can't be enforced because it's not legal by state statutes.
One other thing I might mention related to that, and it also shows intervention without legislation. There was a proposal about 2 years ago to eliminate anchoring just inside the cut at Venice, Florida. And it had to do with a community organization that wanted to provide sailing instruction to their students. They didn't want the boats to anchor, in effect, block the access, and as well as an area for which they could be sailing through. We actually, our professional lobbyists at that point, actually got involved, went there, surveyed the area, met with them, and basically avoided any legislation. We worked the solution out that was satisfactory to this club and was good for us. So that's another reason to find out what are some of the issues. Does that help, John?
Yeah, it does. I guess that's the key, is to try to figure out, and maybe it's different in different areas, but what are the hot topics that are making them think about legislation?
Yeah, that's exactly right.
All right.
That's as important as anything else.
Yep. All right. I'm good.
Thanks, John. Let's go to Brad. Brad, I think you should be able to unmute and go ahead.
It just magically appeared on my screen. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Kim, you're wonderful. My goodness, I'm impressed. I have a request and a question. Is it easy or possible to give us a really good summary of the anchoring limitation area legislation that has already been past. I ask because it seems to me that if we can, in a few minutes, tell a success story to the legislators, it gives them an answer when someone calls them, which they might find attractive. And it certainly would help us, I think, sound like we know what we're talking about, which would be helpful. So my question is a request. Please give us a good summary or a good working summary or a link to a summary of that legislation, because I thought that CJ's comments about the number of the mechanisms for reporting derelict boats, the number of boats that have been reported, the fact that half of those are already in process of being removed, without dwelling too long on the length of that process, is a pretty good story. That things are more under control perhaps than is obvious. So that's my request. My question is, do we know of any incipient issues for this session? I understand, Kingsley, that one of our jobs is to get that information from the legislators with whom we're going to talk. But is your radar picking up on anything that we should know about before we walk in so we don't get blindsided?
I'm only aware of that the Miami issue is going to come back. That came in through the speaker's office directly at the last minute during the session. It actually broke House rules. It'll be back. There's no question. So, but that's the only one I'm specifically aware of.
Okay. And should we know anything more than that about that issue to keep ourselves out of trouble?
I guess I don't know if I'm not familiar with everyone here in terms of who we're going to be seeing, but if you're seeing a Miami legislator, then we'll probably want to talk to you about it in more depth. If otherwise, I think I would just stay away from the Miami issue specifically and just lay out the general success we've had and are on the verge of having. So.
Yeah, I would agree with that, having been involved with that a bit last year. This is completely Kim's layperson's opinion. But I fear that's, we go in seeking a solution. So first step is, what's the actual problem? And I fear that some of what we were told was the actual problem last year may not have been the full, complete report of the problem. I think it's become harder and harder for a legislator to say, well, we just don't like seeing that boat. But yet there is some very pricey waterfront property in Miami, with people with deep pockets who can hire their own lobbyist or contribute to campaigns. And I'm not saying that happened, because I have absolutely no factual evidence that did happen. All I can say is
2016
it has happened in the
17.
past.
Yes.
And absolutely the reason we have 4 or 5 anchorages that are closed to overnight anchoring is because that is what happened in 2016 or 17. And some of the reasons we were given that this needed to happen in Miami were a bit nonsensical, in my opinion, last year. And it certainly makes me wonder what the driving force behind that was. That said, and that is part of why we don't expect it to go away. It was filed late. It was pushed hard. Probably got, it got shot down on some procedural things, but also because it was mixed in with some other legislation. And there were some of the big boating interests like the National Marine Manufacturing Association and Boat US that were against some other pieces of that legislation. And as this happens, it all kind of got intertwined. But we all left last year's session going, this will be back, and we have not seen the end of that. That said, I don't think it's wise for us to go in and say, don't issue a bill that's going to try and add more anchoring restricted areas, which is where you can anchor overnight, as opposed to anchoring limitation areas. I think we would just want to focus on the solutions here. It's the anchoring limitation areas. No new legislation is needed, and kind of leave it at that. But anybody who's visiting lawmakers extended discussion on what to expect there. Chet, go ahead. Chet is with DeFever Cruisers, and so he is part of the coalition, and we appreciate DeFever Cruisers support. Chet, you should be able to unmute and go ahead, because I do see your hand up.
Okay, can you hear me now?
We can.
Okay, just a couple of comments. Well, first, it's easy to see. We've talked about this state law 327. It's very easy to see what's in that. You can just Google Florida State Law 327 and the entire content shows up on that. The primary area of interest that we've been talking about tonight is the section 4108, and you can very quickly scroll down to that. And actually the write-up on the anchor limitation area is fairly brief. So there's not a lot of excessive verbiage there. It explains pretty much just what it is. But just a couple of other comments. Another area that has been addressed quite a bit in recent years is the definition of derelict boats and what has to be done to have them, by the state terms, legally declared a derelict boat so they can be removed. There are page after page of definition within state law 327 on exactly how to define a boat as a derelict boat. So there's a lot of information there which has already been passed, is already law, but is not really being used. And of course, as has previously been pointed out, there is also funding available that the local areas, and I'm not sure, I think it's by city rather than by county, that a city can request funding from the state to remove derelict boats. My boat is in Daytona Beach, so I see that area quite a bit. And we have had some fairly high numbers of derelict boats in the last couple of years. Well, last year, before the storms hit in October, apparently the local government got the funding, and they must have removed over 20 derelict boats. And they hauled them up and put them on shore, some near the yacht club and an area that used to have some trailered boats stored. And it was almost comical to see how they destroyed them, because a fiberglass boat is not easy to destroy. And what they did was take a backhoe to them and just basically beat them to pieces until they could take the remains and put them in a dumpster and haul them off. But there were probably, I'm guessing, about 20 before the storm season hit in October, November. And then there were a number of additional derelict boats that came after that. And that area, the city governments there got additional funding and removed more derelict boats. So the process is there, it is available. The cities have to be aware of it and take the action to get the money to do it. And that's one of the points that apparently that is not well understood in all areas of the state, because we hear some areas that the derelict boats are sitting there and not being removed. But the state law has established how to declare a derelict boat. You might have, when you're going down the waterway, seen a big red sticker on the side of some of these boats that's probably at least a foot square. That means that the local authorities have come in, and if you get close enough to read it, it says that this is a derelict boat. It's going to be destroyed within X days if you don't do something about it. So those processes are there. They're apparently not well understood by all the cities, or they're just too lazy to address them. But the funding is there, the processes are there. It's just got to be used.
Thanks, Chet. And yeah, another example of the idea that, new legislation is not the answer to this. It exists. It just needs to be implemented.
Okay, can I make one more comment?
Of course.
CJ, you prepared a one-sheet summary. Are you able to put that forward
Yes.
and review it with us? Because that one-sheet summary that you sent out earlier today is a very good. You presented a lot of information, a lot of detail beyond what probably could be reviewed in a short meeting with a legislator, where this one sheet highlights the issues of the ALA and the other points that we're trying to make.
Can we move this discussion offline rather than tying these folks up?
Okay.
This is the one. This is the one pager though. And that's again, we're going to provide you with the PowerPoint, but then this one pager that really gets into it. And I do agree with what Brad asked for. I think that it won't hurt at all to kind of pull just the ALA language and just make that a little bit easier for anybody that we've asked to help us to just kind of have that as a like this, a one pager, very simple. You don't have to go look for it. We'll kind of fill in that information for you.
All right, thank you for that. Any other questions? Any other hands from anyone who is participating and has a question for us? We've got one more. Go ahead, Peter.
Is there any information, we represent different organizations with a lot of different members in our organizations. And is there any information that we should give to our members right now, or anything that our members could do to help forward this cause? Do we have anything that we can share with them, in other words? Or is it too premature?
So I think I know from our standpoint from M2OA, like we, of course, just like you have stepped up to help, we like asked for certain members within certain areas, you know, very specifically to these key legislators that our lobbyists asked us to. That's definitely part of it, right? So we need you first because you're within their territory or within their group. So, but I know for M2A, all of this, like what we're doing right now, was recorded. We're going to actually put it up on our club documents. We're going to put the PowerPoint up on our club documents. We're going to put the one pagers up on our club documents. I'm going to share that through our listserv. And then also we've already talked about maybe even having a webinar about legislative issues in January, which I hope everybody will help, you know, will participate in. But I know for us, for our group, it's definitely group wide. But again, we kind of selected, we had key people that we reached out to based on their zip code and who their legislator was, because our lobbyists said that these were our targets. So we kind of started with you and now we'll bring it out to the entire organization. And I do think there's things like somebody was saying, like being in Palm Beach. Well, maybe that's something, you know, if you have if you have somebody you want to talk to, or just say like, there's these things, you know, take it and run with it. I think that's a wonderful thing. The more people we can educate or help learn about things like this, the better off we're going to be, because it combats I don't know, somebody just told me to put this in the bill and so I did kind of thing. So I think that's a great question, but yes, the goal is to get it out further.
And
Yeah,
I
there's
think-
nothing secret about any of this that we've presented today. This will be distributed as widely as possible among all 4 membership associations. Go ahead, King.
I sort of hesitate to say this, but also when it comes to trying to raise money this coming December, for this lobbyist we have, who's absolutely essential. The reason why we lost that legislation back in 16-17 is we didn't have representation. You know, encourage your other voters to contribute. It's really very important.
No, I couldn't agree more with that. That was my next point I was going to say. I've just been aware of this group just recently, and I think that the more of our members were aware of this, that I think we'd get money to come in, because we need, you know, these guys are going to fight it with money, and we need money to fight them. So I don't know how.
I agree.
You know,
We all agree. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So how do we let our members know about even the existence of this group? Because quite honestly, I don't think many do. No.
I agree. We just had our M2A rendezvous, and you know, and I spoke for about, I don't know, 10 minutes, and you know, quite a few were like, oh yeah, but we had 50 new members there who had never heard of it. So how do we make sure that everybody is well aware? For us, we're going to do a webinar series, similar to this, but you know, and get it out there. But you're right, there's definitely ways that we need to get the word out.
Yeah, I think from AGLCA's perspective, it gets the most attention during our fundraising season, and we are solely trying to raise enough money to pay for our lobbyist contract. We're not making political donations, although that probably would be a successful way to approach it. We know that not all our members are on the same side on some of these issues. We're just trying to fund the lobbyist, and that's it. And that's when, from AGLCA's perspective, it gets the most attention. The Florida legislature is also in session from, excuse me, like January to May, roughly, which is where, again, if there is something going on, that's when we're sending out updates. Sadly, the rest of the year, it tends to fall by the wayside in favor of more kind of hot topics that are relevant at that particular point in time. We do try to bring it to members' attention. More and more, everyone is consuming information in different ways from different channels, and it gets hard to keep things front and center. But yeah, this group and any other voters can help us keep that front and center, because during our fundraising time, we put things out on social media. Anybody can contribute to this. It does not have to be a member. We are doing work that is really for the good of the whole boating community. And if you know boaters who are not members of any of these organizations, they are more than welcome to contribute.
Absolutely.
Any other,
and I would also suggest for us, like, it's also getting the word out to our bigger organization, because we have certain number of members, but not everybody's in Florida. So even though sometimes they feel like, well, maybe that's not that big a deal to me because I'm not in Florida, but we say Florida is a bellwether state for many reasons, because there's a lot of things that happen here that influence others. So again, there's legislation being looked at in Charleston. So in cruise, it's anchoring rights is an important thing. So absolutely, I would suggest that everybody on this group our goal is to get the word even further than we currently have. So,
Yeah.
and if you can help us with that, that's the best thing that we can ask for.
Yes,
Yeah,
that'd be much appreciated.
Yeah, we have fought similar legislation in Georgia, and this goes to CJ's comment that Florida is a bellwether state. It has moved up the East Coast. We have fought unnecessary and unfair anchoring legislation in Georgia, South Carolina, and North Carolina at this point. And South Carolina passed a similar law to what Florida's got, where you can state law says that towns can only limit anchoring to like 30 days. And for active cruisers, that's more than enough. But this doesn't stop at Florida. Florida is just the state where it's become serious enough that we have to, year after year, be represented by a lobbyist there. And that's the sole cost of this anchoring committee. The rest is grassroots and volunteer efforts. So yeah, we appreciate the support.
Oh, so thank you to every single
yes,
person.
Thanks to everyone who has sat with us for this.
Yes, it really is your efforts that make this happen.
Yeah,
Thank you very much.
We appreciate the help, and we're encouraged to see all of you out here being engaged in the process. So we will continue to keep in touch with you regarding scheduling of appointments. We completely understand that this is not anybody's core focus. So if we come to you with a date and time that doesn't work, we will figure it out from there. But you can expect to hear about that soon. And in the meantime, we will get these materials to you so you can start to review them and use them as a resource and be prepared. So thank you all. Appreciate you spending time with us this evening. And thank you, Kingsley and CJ and chat for helping present this. Have a good night, everyone. Take care.
Night.
Good night.
Bye-bye.
All right.